All right. So, hello everyone. So we're going to start right now. So if you're here, please turn on your cameras. So, 14, so it's Kate, Emily, Ariana, Jill. Okay. All right. So let me start sharing. Where's my PowerPoint? Yeah. Okay. We do this again. So we're done with the. Can people hear me? Uh, can anyone hear me? Okay, because everyone was frozen for a second, so I was not hearing the echo.
Yeah,
Okay,
you're back now.
okay, good. All right. Okay, so today we're going to talk about first like method or the only method we're going to cover in this class with for observation research, and it's called ethnography or ethnographic research. All right. And so we're going to cover what is ethnography, the definition, some topics in ethnography, how you do sampling in ethnographic research, some advantages and disadvantages, and a few examples of ethnographic studies and ethnographic research papers. So just to start, when you hear the word, so how many of you have heard of the term ethnographic research before or ethnography? Okay, so we quite a number. So can one of you tell us what does ethnography means to you, or like what do you remember from uh, learning about ethnography?
I just remember it being broken up into sort of two aspects, one being like uh, just natural observation, and then one being kind of a more structured interview.
So you're right in both. So it's both. Emily, do you remember what ethnography means?
I've like heard the word, but I don't remember any sort of definition.
Yeah. All right. So ethnography is like what Lily said. It's an natural observation. And so it's a method by which you observe a group of people in their natural environment or their natural setting uh, to draw some conclusions about their behavior, their lives, etc., etc. That so ethnography could be based solely, and we're going to get into that in a few slides, solely based on observation, or it could have an interviewing component as well, right? When you hear the word, so the word ethno, do you know what ethno means? Or ethnic or ethnicity? You hear these words before, right? So when actually we have Gianna, you're from your major ethnic studies, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So what does ethnicity means?
Ethnicities are, it's like your cultural heritage. So it's like cultural practices that you can identify with that um,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So within ethnography, so it's the study of groups. It's the study of cultural groups. Okay, you wanna learn something about the practices, the customs, the shared heritage, the culture, the habits of a specific group of individuals. Um, so there are three main components for ethnographic research, and they could tell you why it is important in research. So it's from the point that I was just saying. So it's about a cohesive group of people. All right. You're not studying individuals per se. You're studying a group or different groups. And so, for instance, I wanna look into the community of, let's say, swimmers or hikers or bikers or professional athletes or line cooks. So it is a group and it shares some cohesive or a common cultural heritage. It could be professional, it could be linguistic, it could be religious. So I could study, I don't know, like whatever religious minority in some state in Mexico, or Irish Catholics in Boston, or Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn, like those type of thing, and like any group that have some shared things. So this is as opposed to just doing, let's say, a survey in which you do redraw like a random sample of individuals, right? So you like you're studying residents of the United States and you studying their views about, I don't know, uh, voting intentions or something. You don't have to have, the only thing they share is like being citizens, but there's in that setting, you're not looking at specific cultures you want to explore, right? You're looking at just individuals and their views, and then how would they aggregate into a majority or a minority opinion. Ethnographic research would then give you a detailed description about a group. You're not only hearing their point of view, they're looking at what they do and what they say and how they interact with one another. Um, Another component is like it's based on having an analyzing the group from within. And so that is to say, remember when we talked about empirical research, and one feature of it is detached. So the researcher detach themselves from the subjects they're studying. So you're sort of like independent from whatever, let's say, people say in a survey, or like how they feel. Whereas the ethnographic research, because it's followed the interpretive paradigm, the researcher is actually immersed in the subject matter, or like in the with the subject they are researching. So you would have sort of say to go and want to see a reality from the perspective of the group you're studying. Okay, assuming, for instance, I am. So, for example, let's say we're researching nurses in San Diego County, right? And so we would go and then to different hospitals. We would stay with the nurses for a long period of time, and we would observe and hear from the nurses and about the nurses. And so we're going to see the daily reality they have from their points of view. We haven't gathered them in some room to talk about their experiences. We actually went to them. And so what this is one of the key features of ethnographic research is try to look into the specific dynamics of the group from within, right? And finally, it's also based about interpreting the lived reality of humans, uh, in which we can then draw some lessons for like social life. So when we talked about focus groups, if you remember, that they reflect the group opinions. Ethnographic research goes deeper than that and is try to portray the group's reality. So it's not only the opinions, but how the group is being treated as a whole, and how the group members treat one another, and how the group members react to external factors or internal factors. Right? So you would interpret in ethnographic research, because it's based on observation, all of these things put together, and not only like points of view or attitudes and things like that. So it's more like about the lived reality of groups. Okay. One reason for that is pretty simple. Like why we do that. Going to ask you a very, very, very simple question. Do people always tell you the reality about what they do? Yes, no? Do people always say the reality, always tell the truth? Okay, yeah, yeah. So yeah, so that's one reason, and so people don't always tell you the reality of what they do. Sometimes it's just about simply lying. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes people cannot tell you or cannot describe what they do to you. What they do, comma, to you. Like the things they're like their reality, in terms of like they cannot describe it. They don't have the language to describe it. They haven't paid attention to the things they do. And so topics, unique topics that could be covered more by ethnographic research rather than any other methods are, for instance, things that cannot be quantified or categorized. And so, for instance, and I mentioned this example many, many times, I'm studying the experience of remote learning by students. And one way we could quantify that, right? Like, so I could look at your grades and compare it to previous grades. We could run a survey and look at, let's say, your level of satisfaction. We could look at your course evaluation. But will that capture everything? Right? So do your grades always reflect your learning outcome? So,
No.
yeah, well, that's a definitive no. So there are some missing things that you cannot measure by now. So for instance, like it's about the experience of remote learning. I could like a researcher potentially could go and then would say with like a sample of 5 students, would rotate and then see observe the whole thing. So for example, right now I'm missing what's happening surrounding you. I don't know, let's say the level of noise, like in different like rooms. So what do you do before you go into like a class, like a Zoom class? What do you do after? I don't, okay, I cannot observe like sometimes the level of stress or the activities you do while you're in class, the activities you do while you work on assignments, the things you do to stay away from the computer screen and do something else in order to like be able to come back. Like how do you deal with Zoom fatigue? Those type of things, the actual like behavior that people do, those type of things cannot always be quantified. Like yeah, I can ask you about like how satisfied or like how productive you think this is, and you will give me some number and it would reflect something, right? But I'm not getting the details, and those details can be extracted if the researcher observe these subjects. Another benefits of or like type or like approaches that ethnographic research can do better is like studying things over time. So even if, let's say, we do a focus group and I recruit, let's say, 12 of you, and we talk about everything surrounding like Zoom and remote learning and assignments and professors and all of that, I could not see the progress of your points of views. So I didn't see like how you felt 2 months ago, how you're going to feel 2 months from now, or like 4 months from now. Ethnographic research, because it's supposedly like you spending like let's say 2, 3, 4 months with someone, you would see their progress. You see like the swings when they start like to become more stressed, when they start to become more comfortable, when they gain confidence about something, when they became more productive, less productive. That like if we observe like a social reality for 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, you can actually see that progress, right, in real time. And so that's different than interviewing, because when you interview someone, we're just getting like a snapshot of one time frame, or like just the present, right? And even if you ask them about the past, like how did you feel 6 months ago, that's they're only trying to reconstruct the past to you. So you're not directly observing it. So ethnographic research is used for such studies, or observation research used for such studies in which you want to see real progress across time. And also it's good for like if you want to study organizations from within. So supposedly you're studying like a company, or let's say university. So in a university, there is the formal structure. So we have the president, the VPs, the different deans. Then we have the college dean for each college, and then we have department chairpersons, and then we have faculty, and we have staff. So those things you could see on paper, but you don't know how those different actors relate to one another, or like act on it. How does like communication goes from like top to bottom, or like top to bottom, or bottom up? How do people even relate to each other horizontally? So how do departments talk to one another? What's the relationship, let's say, within the department of sociology or communication studies? Who are like the influential individuals? Who has a grudge against someone else? Who is more experienced? Because they are like informal relationship, and let's say informal power structure parallel to the formal structure, right? And so those type of things, unless you're there, you cannot see, right? And it's similar to college, right? They are like, even as students, there are things that happen in class, um, and then in terms of like lecture and whatnot. And then there are other things like how do you succeed, or like what are the things you do when you're in college, like different tips or tricks about something. And those things you get once you're in college, right? They're really hard to transmit via like different means other than directly experiencing them, right? Um, and then finally, ethnographic research. So as opposed to like artificial setting, could give you the actual lived reality. So we mentioned, for example, like we want to see the behavior of nurses. We could do interviews, we could do some experiment, but the most accurate way to reflect how nurses reacted to, let's say, the COVID situation or dealing with the pandemic, is to see how they've dealt with the pandemic, right? And so one advantage that ethnographic research, let's say, is always the one with the highest, what we call it, ecological validity or naturalistic validity. So it's the closest thing to reality, or like to natural settings, because it involves less manipulation by the researcher, either via having like a focus group room in which people have a way to structure their answers, or like experiments in action in which you actually induce behavior of the participants, or the action of the participants. So that's about the nature of ethnographic research. So now we're going to switch to collection. So data collection, so we have two ways for data collection in ethnographic research. So one is direct observation. So these famous one is like field notes, in which you go into a place and then typically taking notes. So like you go into a building, you describe the building. Was it cold? Was it hot? How was the ventilation going? What did people say? What did people look? What did people feel? This type of things. And so they could be done while like in real time while you're there, or they could be reflective, so you go and observe a situation and then you go back to your house or to your room and then like try to remember and reconstruct the experience. And then we have ethnographic interviews, and they follow exactly the same different types we talked about when we talked about interviews. So ethnographic interviews, as opposed to focus groups, let's say, is that they're done in the natural setting, right? So I'll go and interview nurses while they're in duty, or like, or while they're in the hospitals, for example. Or like I will talk to students. Let's say if we come back to campus soon, I will like talk to students in the classroom or like within the college campus, and I will talk to the professors while like for example, in their natural, what we would call natural habitat, like while they are teaching, and that will give a different feel, right? Because it allow for demonstrations. Like this is how like we record the lectures, and I could choose different devices, or like I could show someone my standing desk in my room right here. So the things I could do while being interviewed in the natural setting, as opposed to like an artificial setting. Um, the data, so the field notes said like the idea of the field note is like that you immerse yourself within that environment and you take notes, and those notes can open, and they cover everything. So because it's based on an immersive experience, so even the feelings and reaction of the researcher, him or herself, would be recorded, right? So you could say, yeah, I like we went to that hospital and I felt the stress of blah blah blah, or I felt threatened. And so you would try even to capture the natural moment, or like you would describe the emotional reactions even of others people around you. So the good thing about field notes is like they're really open and expansive. It would make it harder then, and we're going to talk later about data analysis and ethnographic research. It would make it harder to analyze the data, but that would make ethnographic research like more rich. It gives you more like a vivid experience, not only about what such and such said or what such and such did, but also all of the other things like the body language, the the atmosphere, the external factors, and all of those things. And then to conduct an ethnographic research, you would need a unique type of volunteers, or like key informants. So you know, who is an informant? Do you know that word, an informant? What does an informant means? If you're an informant for the CIA, what does that mean? What would that mean? An idea? Informant?
Yeah, it's like you're somebody embedded in the community of interest and you're passing information essentially.
Yeah, yeah. So either you're working for the CIA uh, or not for the Green Bay football, but let's say University of San Diego. You are someone who's extracting information and giving it to the researcher. Um, Sometimes, so that's called the key informant, like someone from that or like embedded in whatever environment you or like a community you're studying, and they are good at extracting information. Either they are really good note takers or they understand the language of the people you're studying, or they're more familiar with that community. Uh, then we also have gatekeepers, and those are participants who can grant you or denying you access to a group, right? Um, so let me ask. So let's talk to someone I really talked about. So Olivia, may I ask you where you're from originally, or like where your
I'm
parents
from New
from?
York.
You're from New York. Which part?
Upstate.
Oh, okay, okay. Let's say, for example, someone shows up at your doors all of a sudden, and then like knock knock. Okay, so like, hi, my name is Mike. I'm from the University of Wisconsin, and we're trying to study, I don't know, the social habits of upstate New York residents. So yeah, would you allow me just to stay here for 2 months? I'm just gonna observe the way you live and take some notes and then leave. How would you react?
Um, I don't know. I mean, it would probably kind of be weird for him to just like stay here for 2 months.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is. It is weird. Like people don't like let people in if they just show up out of nowhere. But imagine, but this that assumption. But if you do it like so, this image is from Uganda. Let's say, yeah, you like people have been doing this for like a century. Yeah, you show up at some village in Uganda and say, hey, I'm like from an American university and just wanna look at the customs and habit of Ugandans. It doesn't work that way. So what you would have is then a gatekeeper. So it's someone typically from that community would then vouch for you, or like would give you access. So let's say it's some village elder, or like the head of the household, or like the school principal, for instance, and they're like some researcher from the University of San Diego who want to investigate something or research something in public schools. Then yeah, sure, we're going to let you in and observe the classrooms. That type of situation, right? Um, so those type of like it could be the same person as the key informant, but like typically you would need that, right? So unless you're doing an ethnography in like public space, let's say you go to a public park or like a theme park, or you just sit in college in campus, you would need, so unless it's like that, you would need a gatekeeper. And similar to gatekeeper, you need a sponsor, who is someone would then introduce you to the community member and try to vouch for you, right? So if someone would say then, okay, so assuming Olivia, this was like a project we're doing in school, so like how different communities or households in America celebrate Thanksgiving. So it could compose like if you going into someone else's house, staying in someone else's house, and then they staying in your house and observing each one's family, right? So someone will sponsor that, like, yeah, you will be the gatekeeper and the sponsor, like, like, hey, this is like Emily, and she's from blah blah blah, and she's going to stay. Like, we are part of this organization, and we're doing this project, and she's gonna stay for a few days. So please try to help her, like, be helpful, like with any information, and someone else will do the same for you in the community that goes to visit. That type of thing. And sometimes, for instance, that sponsor will also could give you access to, let's say, specific documents, like specific places that you could gain access to. Like, I don't know, you're studying like a monastery in Spain, and then they're like, I don't know, some manuscript that dates 1,000 or like years ago, and yeah, like that monk whom has access would then give you access to these documents, or like show you different places that otherwise you would have not been able to see. um, so yeah, that's something that is really key in ethnographic research. that you won't need typically in other types of research, right? Once you get like, yeah, you're interviewing someone, they don't need to take you places. But ethnographic research, the idea of like finding key informants, gatekeepers, and sponsors, who, by the way, could be the exact same person. So one person could play those three roles, or they could be different people. Um, and then when you sample for an ethnographic research, there's no like a key number. Uh, Usually in ethnographic research, the sample would be small because we said ethnographic research like takes a long period of time. So if you're spending like a 3 month within one community, it's really hard for you to deal with different groups because let's say you're like in 4 different communities and in each one you're spending 4 months. That's like a year and a half already. So usually the samples in ethnographic research are smaller than other methods. But the goal is not to draw generalizations, and so it's similar to, because this is qualitative research. The idea is to go for depth and not width. That is to say, you want to explore one group, but you're getting rich details about them. So it's a smaller group, but more dense information or richer details, right? So there is, we're gonna see in quantitative research, we're actually looking for generalizability, but for ethnographic research, we're looking for vividness of the description. But generalization could still be obtained if the ethnographic study is replicated in different contexts and different settings, right? So if I observe, I don't know, 5 families in upstate New York and how they do Thanksgiving, that doesn't speak to the upstate New York, let alone the state of New York or the United States of America. But then other people do different studies in different parts of the country. So let's say in New York City, in New Jersey, in parts of California, in Oregon. And then when someone compares those studies, you start to see some trends. Like, yeah, okay, those are like common traditions, let's say, for Thanksgiving, and then we could see like different communities have different things, right? That is the sort of generalizability you could get, right? But one study typically does not represent a generalizable conclusion or portrayal of the studied population. Um, And so related to this idea, and so how do we sample or like how to recruit participants for ethnographic research? We're going to talk more in details about sampling when we talk about surveys, but just very quick, and we're going to go back to this slides on Friday. It's either the two major things. It's either you pick or like people volunteer. So purposive sampling, for instance, so purposive sampling, like to start with the first type, is like you select informants whom you think have the qualities to gather like good information for you, right? So yeah, let's say I know Gianna is from ethnic studies, and I will then pick her specifically to observe like the interaction in ethnic studies courses. Okay. And I picked Gianna specifically because she's someone, let's say, with a background like who took also courses in communication. So I would know like she has like some like frame of reference or like some comparative benchmark, right? So you could have that. You could select people because they represent different groups. So let's say we want to see the experience of students taking research method classes. So I could do, okay, let me pick 2 sophomores, 2 juniors, and 2 seniors, right? And I'll pick people who are good at asking questions or like good observational qualities. So those are selective, like that's why we call them purposive. So there's a purpose by the researcher which made them select or sample those specific participants or informants, right? And then there are other types in which people come to you. So one of them is like volunteer sampling, and that's the most typical one. You just announce, like, here's a study about blah, 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 and if you're interested, please contact Dr. Aziz, and this is the email, the phone numbers. And so this is more like, yeah, it's the exact opposite of purposive sampling. This is totally random. So whoever is more willing to participate will take part, and then you could then be invited to that community, whatever they are, part of, like, let's say an organization within the school, different ethnic groups, or like a group, like a political group, culture group, etc. Um, and then snowball sampling, and I'll leave it like a snowball is like I ask someone and you tell me about someone. So yeah, I'll ask Emily and Lily, please participate, and then recruit like two other participants that whom you know, and those two participants will then recruit three others whom they know, and then three would recruit five, and so that's why it's called snowball, right? And so we're going to go back to this one later on Friday. I would like to play like a few videos before we leave. So this is an example of an ethnographic study. This was a used to be very famous. It still is, still influential. So this is from this study was turned into a book called Sidewalks, and Mitchell Donier is a very famous sociologist, and you would see here like a description of what this study was all about, and what type of research they've done. So I'm only going to play a short clip out of it.
I used to sell jewelry.
So this is Hakeem, the one who was mentioned just at the beginning.
And then the police started confiscating my jewelry. As the years progressed, we saw everyone that was out here doing handmade stuff. They were slowly disappearing. It got worse and worse. They started taking our jewelry. They started taking our equipment. They started taking us to jail.
A poet had been arrested for violating our vendor law because he didn't have a license to sell his poetry pamphlets. And that struck me at the time, and I was a true civil libertarian when it came to the First Amendment. What came of that was my submitting an amendment to the local code that said, except for written materials, so that the vendor law would apply to the trinkets and beads and other things, but not to written materials.
Because they told us the only thing we could sell was written matter, we started fronting the jewelry and other things that we sold off with magazines. And then people started to buy the magazine. A lot of our old customers and friends would say, well, I got some books, I got some magazines. And we started getting them from them. And then the recycling thing came along. And we was noticing books and magazines being put out, especially in this particular area, which is NYU all around. And that's how it started.
Yeah, so that's an example of like ethnographic research. Uh, so to test you a little bit, so Hakim is what in this study? What role is he playing from a few slides ago? What role is Hakim, the person you saw talking? What role is he playing in this study? He's what?
Like a key informant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So exactly. So Akeem is a key informant and even probably like a sort of like a sponsor or gatekeeper. So he's the one who would introduce the researcher to the community of street vendors in the city of New York, particularly here in Greenwich Village. I'm not sure how familiar with New York City you are. But so yeah, so you would need someone like that, and then they'll talk to you, and then we'll let other people talk to you and introduce you and show you different places. Um, and you notice, so why are people selling books? Did you get the idea? Like, why are they selling books on the street of New York, rather than other things? Did you hear what that person was saying? Why did the street vendors switch to selling books?
Basically, the regulations changed so that the only thing they could sell without a license was written materials.
Right. So yeah, in New York City, you could sell written materials without violating any like you don't even you didn't need a license. You don't need to pay anything. So all of a sudden, street vendors switched to selling books and magazines instead of like old antiques. That's something. So that's topic that you would have not picked up just by like talking to people. Like who would have thought of that, right? Like if you're just a researcher, let me investigate why people are selling magazines and books. Like that won't come to mind naturally. That it is because of some old law that prohibited selling of other stuff without a license, except for written materials. That's something you would see if you lived in that place. Like you walk on the street of New York and you just realize like everybody is selling written materials. So and they don't like have a lot of money. So what's the matter? And then but in your anyone could sell written materials. So that's something that would come only through observational research. And then I let the so you heard part of an interview, and then they would show you different like photographs of people like sleeping in the streets or like talking to one another. That's also part of the ethnographic research. So when you do ethnographic research, as I said earlier, you don't only capture the viewpoints of the participants, you capture everything. So you would make notes of like how they deal with customers, for example, the street vendors, how they deal with the police. So that's actually a big part of if you ever read the book. That's also a big part of it. The relationship between the community and the police, with the city officials, the issue of homelessness and street vendors, relationship to other students and different institutions, all of those things that surround the phenomenon or the practice you're studying will be part of your study, right? So this is something that you won't get from focus groups, you won't get from surveys or even from interviews, right? Those are things you would only get if you go into a natural setting and try to capture all of that. Okay. Here's another example. So this is a short clip from a documentary called Laundry Lives by a documentarian named Sarah Pink.
Masukkan cucian yang sudah direndam pewangi tadi. Caranya menata untuk dikeringkan begini. Oke. Nah, sekarang terus apa? Ini. Ya. Sini balik. kali. Nah,
Ya, jadi ini cuma
jadi tadi keringkan itu tok udah.
mesin cuci kan bisa untuk nyuci baju juga, untuk milas juga. Kok nggak pakai mesin cuci aja, kenapa?
Saya nggak suka, biar gimana nanti bajunya kan cepet rusak Mbak, yang ada gambar-gambarnya itu loh.
Oh,
Jadi
jadi
Mbak lebih tahu kalau ini seperti ini cara. Nanti jadi kan masih awet dari dulu warnanya ini. Ada gambarnya apa kan Mbak, sablon-sablon itu. Sablon-sablon kan kalau di mesin cuci cepat rusak. Jadi si Mboknya itu dulu baru biar awet. Pakaiannya awet. Itu biar cepet ya Mas. Agak lama, udah lama tapi masih bagus warnanya. Celana saya hitam saya ini sudah lebih dari 10 tahun. Masih bagus hitamnya.
So yeah, so this is another example of ethnographic research. So yeah, so this was so that this so this documentary is like this is what the filmmaker made. Like she went to like different parts of the world, like different communities from different languages, different countries, and just observed people while they're doing laundry. And then from that, like she would hear different stories or different techniques about how do people do laundry, how they soak the clothings, how different cultures deal with it, and so you could get like there are specific things you could see only if you would observe someone in the national settings. Like imagine we're doing focus group on how you do the laundry, okay? Where are you going to start the conversation? That's like it's really hard to talk about doing the laundry. It's not like the most exciting topic, right? But once you do observations like that, you start to notice like key cultural differences, let's say, or like techniques like older like women like here from like a random village in Indonesia, and like you start to hear interesting things, right? And you would then learn from this small thing. If you ever watch this documentary, I'm not sure if it's still fully available or not, but you would still will notice like big things from small observations. What I mean by that is like you would hear like by learning about the laundry, you would hear about like people preference for how they like their clothing to smell or like the colors to look like, or for example the sanitation system or like water access in different parts of the world, right? You could draw like big lessons about that or like big insights from focusing on a narrow topic, but you go in depth, right? So this is something you get from observational research, and you can also notice like how people deal with the machine, right? Like, do people know like use the full features or not, and how like what specific features are people more reliant on as opposed to the others. Here's a related example. So this is also from like a professional researcher, not an academic one.
An increasingly popular technique in new product development is what has come to be known as ethnography, a term that really grew out of the field of anthropology, and it's really just an academic sounding word for observational research. Why do it? Well, I think the notion is that sometimes there's a huge departure between what people say they do versus what they actually do. And the only way we would know this, of course, is through observation. Another problem is that there's some needs that we refer to as unarticulated needs. They're things the customer doesn't even think about, and of that. We were many years ago working with a division of Baxter on a new dialysis machine. And one of the things that no customer ever brought up, but which we observed, is that during a dialysis treatment, the nurses have to be writing a lot of things down. And they seem to be going ridiculous distances across the clinic just to find a flat surface on which to write something down. Nobody ever brought it up, but we observed it time and time again. And what my client ultimately did was they put like a flat shelf on top of the machine that was just incredibly popular, even though it had been totally unarticulated. Now, of course, once you brought it up with people, yeah, they recognized it immediately. Yeah, I always go all the way over to the nurse's station just to write something down. There's also, again, this disconnect between what they do and what they say they do. If you, we were doing something on auto painting, and companies, it turns out the process of color matching is actually non-trivial. It's a very complicated thing to do. And all of the paint manufacturers have a very rigorous, specific set of steps that you're supposed to go through to get a perfect match. Well, when we got out there and started watching guys painting cars, what we saw was they weren't paying any attention to all those steps at all. They were taking every shortcut in the book, figuring they could get it close enough. Why did they do that? Well, most of them are paid based on piecework. So, faster is better, and close enough is good enough. And our client was totally unaware of this. So there's this big disconnect that you can only learn sometimes through observational techniques. Now, there are a lot of pros and a lot of cons to ethnography. One of the difficulties is that the interviews are very costly and very time-consuming. And as a result, it's impossible to get the kind of sample size that many product developers feel they need to do good voice of the customer or good discovery study. So they tend to rely on relatively small sample sizes. The other big problem that everybody contends with is the issue that has come to be known as the Hawthorne effect. And in a nutshell, what that is the notion that observation alters behavior. For instance, you would see this all the time in a construction site, where when the workers know that they're being observed, everybody's going exactly by the book, they're wearing their hard hat and following all the safety rules. And the minute the observers go away, they go back to sometimes we wear the hard hat, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we saw a board over our knee, which is a real no-no. It's a great way to cut into your leg. And it's almost impossible to filter that out in an ethnography. It simply is a kind of a fact that a good researcher has to try to contend with along the way.
Right, so you heard, so this is you heard from someone who is in product development and in marketing.
And increasingly popular.
So ethnographic research is usually popular, as a matter of fact, with marketing firms, especially the big ones, with product development, because you could see how people are dealing with the product, right? Like, so let's say I'm the manufacturer, like washing machines, and we introduce new features, but we don't know if people are utilizing them or not. And in a survey, people could give you some answers, like be totally unaware of something. And so when you conduct that observation, you will start to notice, okay, this is how people are using the machine. Or like it's like what the gentleman was saying, there are like some unarticulated needs or problems. So you might be struggling with something, but you cannot quite articulate it, right? Unless someone brings it up. Like imagine like if we change something in the keyboard, it will just make the writing or the typing process more comfortable. Or like there's something in the screen that's annoying you, but you cannot put it into words what it is. Like those type of things. And so product experience, or like this would be part of what they would call user experience or UX research, is based a lot on observational research, right? The way we do, let's say, gaming, the way like we use social media, right? Like we use it for different purposes. Those things can be attested by or like assessed by observing people directly rather than talking to them. So we are out of time. So next time we're going to do like Friday, we're going to talk about analyzing data and advantages and disadvantages, and then talk a little bit about quantitative research. Do you have any questions? All right. So then remember the due date for assignment for activity number 3 is Friday by midnight. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to contact me. So,
Thank you.
see you later.
Thank you.